your presentation.
Kia ora. Mr. Chair, congratulations on your recent appointment and the opportunities and responsibilities that come with that. And to all the members for the task before you. My name is Chenery. I'm here as a private citizen. My fourth great-grandfather was in the first Parliament in 1852, and he was in the Parliament in 1855 during the first session saying that the Treaty of Waitangi needs to be honoured faithfully, honourably, dutifully, in accordance with as the natives understand it. That was the language of that time, not in accordance with any extra meaning we want to put on it. So that was the first Parliament. We know now that it was set up without consultation with Māori.
Just write that, and that's a bill.
And we've been going on a journey the last 30 years in relation to treaty settlements too, which I'll talk more about. My submission has a one-page summary on the second page. It outlines 10 problems with the bill, 8 problems with the drafting, 4 desired outcomes, 8 actions for relief sought. Some of the ones that I would re-emphasise is, in terms of the first problem, is that the proposed principles don't reflect what Te Tiriti says, and the promoter of the bill has acknowledged this on Q&A with Jack Tame. It reflects, as he said, what the party and he wants it to be and what the party thinks the principle should be, not what it actually says. So that's what I'd emphasise. The second would be that the bill and the proposed principles ignores colonial harm to Māori. To say that all New Zealanders are equal denies our history. It denies the history that's been acknowledged within the historical accounts of all treaty settlements. If we think all New Zealanders should be equal, Māori should get more than 1% of what's been returned through treaty settlements. The 1% is not in dispute. That's as acknowledged in the Waikato Raupatu deed in 1995. And then through the Ngāi Tahu and the continuation of that same policy. It also ignores the Crown apologies to Māori. So there's a one-page summary, there's more detail on each of those points, and then I went through each of the deeds and collated together the Crown apologies. So for those who aren't aware or haven't been involved with treaty settlements or reading them, the sections are much longer. There's a historical account, which is negotiated agreed. There are Crown acknowledgements of past breaches. There's an apology, and the last paragraph of that is an apology and a recommitment to a new treaty-based relationship. Helmut Modlick spoke to the Crown's apology to Ngāti Toa earlier this morning, and I understand you have Andrew Little, who was speaking this afternoon, who's also given those. The other problem I'd emphasise is it's a continuation of past Crown policies of assimilation, integration, amalgamation. Those words might sound silly, but going through our history, those were explicit policies by the government. Amalgamating Māori, 1960s, urban migration, intentional policy of Crown integration from the Hun report, 1960s. I've got some references there. And a lot of the rhetoric from those promoting the bill have been that Māori as an ethnicity, as individuals, and completely ignoring the political authority of Māori, completely ignoring the mandated entities that have been established through treaty settlements, even as the political authority resides at the hapu level. The proposed bill, in talking about Māori just as ethnicity, ignores the entities that have been established through the treaty settlement process. Instead of trying to rewrite Te Tiriti, desired outcome is that we have a more broader conversation about what constitutional arrangements are that reflect the agreement that was signed. We can't do that without informed citizens, and so that's where I'd also like you to play a role. One of my specific ask of you as a committee, I've been through the historical records for the Hansard debates for all of the treaty settlements. New Zealand First Party, led and driven by the National Party, Labour Party, Greens, ACT, when in government, have all signed off the permission for these deeds to make these agreements, these apologies and recommitments, and every political party has unanimously supported these arrangements through Parliament. My specific ask of you as a committee is that you include the collation of Crown apologies and commitments to treaty-based relationships within your select committee report. We're not going to be able to have informed decisions. There's lots of discussion in the previous speaker about political views, political bias. I think you could make a meaningful contribution to this debate by including those statements in your report and speaking to those. Kia ora.
Thank you, Tao. No, I appreciate your submission. We'll take some questions. First one is from Joseph Mooney, then we'll go Stephen Abel and then Dr. Webb.
Good morning, Reece. Thank you for that submission. Look, I've just reading your written submission. You said in terms of Article 1, that the fundamental feature is that the authority granted the British Crown of Waitangi was governmental authority in relation to British subjects in New Zealand. Now, I just want to question you on that because Henry Williams translated the treaty to Te Tiriti and he explained it. And Bishop Selwyn wrote to him in 1847 concerned about the actions of the government at that time. Henry Williams shared those concerns in his reply letter, but he also said that he had explained that firstly the chief shall surrender to the Queen forever the government of the country for the preservation of order and peace. Do you think that creates a problem for the proposition that Waitangi was only in respect of British citizens?
I think it's important to look at the evidence. I think the hearings that were put in place for the Waitangi Tribunal to have the Crown present its view and position on what the meaning and effect of both the English draft and Te Tiriti o Waitangi were is important to understand. Also had mentors who were involved in Kaumata and Kui of Ngāpuhi who established an independent panel to go and listen to those hearings and create their own report. And it's very important that we put a focus and intention on what the discussion was, including on February the 5th before it was signed, and that the agreement is between two parties. There have been at least a dozen deputations from Rangatira heading over to England to articulate stand for what their understanding of TTT was. So it may be partly answering your question, but I think it's a multilateral agreement and you need to have discussion between the parties. If you're going to have 30 years of apologies for unilateral actions and then take a further unilateral action to redefine it, it seems to undermine the whole premise of what every party here has supported.
Thanks, Carl. We'll go to Steve Nabel and then Dr. Webb.
Kia ora, thank you very much, Carl. This bill is predicated on ideas of there being privilege of one group at the expense of another. Can you expand on your point about a denial of the process of colonisation, whereby the privilege that Pākehā, for example, enjoy today comes off the back of the acquisition and theft and raupatu of Māori land and destruction of Māori, tino rangatiratanga, essentially through the colonial exercise. And the suggestion that somehow the correction is to non-Māori rights that has to be made, how you respond to that in the context of our actual history.
I think many of us aren't well-resourced to have these discussions. I went to Auckland Grammar School. We sat with Sir George Grey's name on the front of the hall, celebrated, and my first year was 1995 when the Raupatu acknowledgement apology was given for the invasion. Those are the words that were used. And there was nothing about that in my school. I don't think we're well-resourced to have those conversations. The most common trope I see in social media is about a gravy train. If you go into the Raupatu deed, I might get the numbers slightly wrong here, but $170 million, $14 billion loss, that's 0.9%. Unless leaders like yourselves and others of us in the community are speaking and correcting these tropes, we're not able to have a useful conversation. Yeah, that's what I'd say.
Thanks, Carl. I think it's a valuable submission. Thank you for your time and being with the committee this morning.
Thank you.
It was another one of those random interesting submissions.
I mean, I know enough to know there's more than meets the eye. I'm glad that pretty much everyone's pointing this out.
Yeah.
We get caught up in sensationalism.
We also need to realise that it's actually not the Treaty Principles Bill, because that's not going to pass. That's the real problem. Look at the Regulatory Standards Bill.
Oh,
it's far more dangerous. And that could, this is a distraction. If you look at the Regulatory Standards Bill, you'll see why there's more danger in there than there is on this bill. He knew it was going to fail. He has written it out in the other bill in a different way, but it's sitting there. And the regulatory standards will be able to override treaty claims, treaty rights, treaty voices, claims of any other interest groups. It's much, much worse.
Maybe Sam can answer this. How is that possible? How is it possible that one law can somehow cancel out another agreement in law?
Because it's not entrenched legislation.
Yeah, like the entrenched legislation that's in New Zealand, the most known one will be probably the latest version of the electoral system for MMP. That would be considered entrenched. And the previous one, the legacy part, was the legacy one before that was the population quota system, which was at the time the law enacted was South Island divided by 25, and that's your population quota. Now it's 16 because of the event of MMP. And probably the previous entrenched legislation that of something that's basically foundational constitutional was the law that legislated all election days have to be held on a Saturday, which dates back to 1949, which is why since 1951 all elections have been held on election day. But they're about one of the few entrenched legislations that are in there. And to have that, you need a 75% majority, and often certain things you will not get a 75% majority because people play politics. It's part of the reason why we went to a level 4 lockdown in 2021. Judith Collins and David Seymour said, no, we object to a remote parliament to playing politics, and that's one of the provisions under the Business Committee is the 75% threshold for it. So we had no remote parliament. We had, they stopped playing that game of politics when Christopher Luxon became leader of the opposition, which is a shame that it took him to stop that stupidity. But these are little foundational principles. It's also part of the reason why free waters legislation was not entrenched, because National was not, National didn't want to play ball because they played politics over it.
Which muddied the water.
I know that someone outlined just have a referendum. The problem with a referendum is the majority will always win and the minority will always lose. If we had a referendum on same-sex marriage, we lose. If you have a
Yeah.
referendum on, say, something else, some other disabled having equal rights before everyone else, disabled will lose.
It's like
It's just the nature.
It's the common argument that comes from, say, the ill-informed. They'll say to Huhana, no, you don't need an accessible bus or an accessible train service. You've got a wheelchair taxi. Not knowing the reality lands of, actually, can you get a wheelchair taxi? Because they just seem to think that's normal. Like, I can tell you right now, Uber doesn't provide wheelchair taxis. That has never happened. So you have to go to providers, like in the case of, that actually, I know Cross Country Rentals does a lot of disabled taxi for the school runs in Wellington.
Well, there's only 3 accessible taxis in the whole of Wellington. So when I fly in for meetings, and I've got a constitutional law meeting with the Law Commission coming up in March, I have to book 6 weeks in advance to get a taxi from the airport and a taxi back to the airport, and I have to work it around the school runs. So I can't do it on the day because I arrive too late, miss half the meeting, and I have to leave too early, miss the rest half the meeting, no sense going. And that's the problem. But there's the other problem. We've had trains down for 32 days. The problem we have with wheelchair taxis as well is that many of the community are on supported living payments, and a taxi is extremely expensive to get from A to B. And so we need these public transport alternatives, but they're putting the price up in Auckland. So it's becoming less affordable to be able to actually leave your house for some of our disabled.
I thought that with the total mobility card, the majority of taxi companies would accept that as a subsidy.
You get a 50% subsidy, but if you want to go into the CBD from
it's
Auckland,
still over $50.
try managing it from South Auckland, and there's huge traffic delays. It's about $160 to get into the city.
Also, like Michelle Willem had this issue taking Elijah from Lowell Bay to Hutt Hospital. And Greater Wellington Regional Council goes, why do you always keep using the bus and the train? Why aren't you using a taxi? And she goes, it's $120 each way because total mobility caps out at an $80 fare. So I have to say that extra $40, or something like she said, it's $120 each way because the subsidy caps out at $80. So instead of $160 taxi fare, it's $120. But that's still a lot of money each way. $240, like that's more than the supported living payment benefit.
Yes.
And that's just to go to Hutt Hospital because in this particular case, that was the hospital that was doing the surgery because that was where their specialty lied.
And as Dave says, and with less disabled people being seen out and about, it becomes easier to oppress an unseen minority. And that's the other issue. I'm about to be back on the Accessible Electoral Commission group, where we're starting to receive, which means I won't be allowed to do any more political broadcasts until after the election. But we're starting to get it out there because last election I was on it. And the one issue I had, I didn't know any candidate that was disabled. None of them that we funded, and we don't know their names and who they are. Not one single one of them that I see any advertising or campaigning for. We have a problem with our political parties not supporting their disabled candidates to get a seat. None of them want us. That's the reality.
No,
they don't want disabled there. And that's what we need to be focusing on, getting disabled into government.
You are completely right, considering I do know the Greens had one disabled candidate who was blind.
Yes.
But her campaign was party vote only in Hutt South, which was Nela Jensen, I think it was. Nela Jensen? I don't know. I'll probably get the last name wrong, but basically...
But the political parties should be behind them. One of the things we discovered is while the political parties have volunteers that hand up billboards, etc., disabled had to pay for their own volunteers to be able to go out and do that. So there was no support from their own political parties either. I want to see the leaders actually behind their disabled candidates. I want to see them visibilising them until we get someone other than Mojo, who was brilliant. But guess what? Next election, she was too far down the list. We've got to stop this placating and bullshit that goes on in government and actually bring disabled candidates in and sitting in government.
Thanks for watching. Make sure you're subscribed to our Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, Instagram, TikTok.